This is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast. This is VP. We are a solutions-based podcast, diving into the world of contrarian investing and alternative finance. You can find us hosted on the No Nonsense Forex YouTube channel, nononsenseforex.com, and podcast players everywhere. Episode 149 is brought to us by Bybit. If you are outside of the United States, Canada, or the UK, having Bybit as your main option or your back pocket option is a really good idea. You can do almost anything you want here. You can trade. There's a great spot market, derivatives, contests. Whatever you want to use it for, it's there. And because they don't take United States customers, the United States government doesn't care about it. And we are learning more and more just how important that is. Oh, and by the way, if you click the link down below, it takes you to my blog, tells you everything you need to know about Bybit, and at the very bottom is my affiliate link. If you click that link, you will get a money back bonus just for depositing and be eligible for every single contest, promotion, airdrop, whatever that Bybit has coming. And there is always something coming because, as we know with Bybit membership, has its rewards. It is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast, and if you recall, last week we did part 1 of the Financial Preppers Checklist, and this week we're going over part 2. We're going to finish it up. Now, part 1 was the very easy part. It was, physical cash, crypto, precious metals, and energy stocks. That's something pretty much anyone can do with very little effort. As we start getting towards the latter part of today's podcast, it is not going to be that way. This episode is going to probably separate those who are truly financially prepared and those who are not, those who are going to be left exposed. But we'll get there soon enough. Nothing I'm talking about today is anything I haven't talked about already in the past, but we're just tying it all up in a little bow. I'm going to give you a good resource towards the end here. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, one of the things that really, again, I think almost anybody can do, but I just had to cut it for time in the last episode, is very underrated, because this is something that I've noticed most rich people have locked down and most poor and middle class don't, even though nowadays especially everybody can do this. So for those of you at home who are making a checklist, the very next box I want you to write down is getting your passives in order, allowing your money to work for you around the clock. These passives you make not only compound, but they can really come to the rescue in a financial emergency. And the best part about it is, at the end of the day, it costs you absolutely nothing. You're just moving your money from one place that's not gaining any interest into another place that is. Now, is there risk involved in doing this? Well, of course there is, but the risk is always very small. So let's talk about 3 ways you can do this. Almost everybody listening right now lives in a country to where their native fiat currency has some type of interest rate attached to it. And if your native currency is not the United States dollar, you may still have access to the United States dollar system, which is a good thing because chances are their interest rate is higher than your currency's is, and it's just a safer fiat currency to be in. But either way, getting interest on your fiat just has always been one of those things that rich people do that nobody else seems to bother with. Now, we've spoken in the past. I can really mainly just speak for the United States. I mean, to a lesser degree, I could speak for Georgia and Armenia, but I don't think we have a lot of you from those 2 countries listening right now. But in the United States, the rate is over 5% right now. And depending on where you go, it's going to be a little bit over or a little bit under. And we've spoken in the past, you can go straight to Treasury Direct. Move some of your money over there and take advantage of that interest rate. Now, if you prefer to do this on your brokerage platform or with your bank, you can do it there too. Most brokerage platforms are already tied to a bank, so they already have programs available for you. And all you have to do simply is move your fiat from one place into another place. This is by far the safest way to do things, and it just seems to get completely ignored by almost everybody, even though it's virtually free money. Now, you can earn passives in several different ways, and I would recommend all 3, but if we want to go up the risk curve a little bit, we'll talk about something I mentioned in the blog about a month or so ago, and that's going to be dividend stocks. Now, most of us here feel like a recession is coming relatively soon, but at the same time, it might not. I mean, I was saying this years ago, and it is still yet to come, so what do I know? But even if I'm right, and the big decline comes right after the United States election or sooner, in the meantime, start learning about these things, start getting a better understanding of them, and learn what your options are. I mean, there are a lot. From dividend aristocrat stocks to dividend ETFs to covered call ETFs to closed-end funds. I mean, you can go so deep into this if you wanted to. but it's another great way to get your passives locked down. And if you don't want to do it now, I understand, but at least get yourself prepared and ready for when it is time. Because even though another prediction of mine is when we do have a recession, it's going to be very long and drawn out. One, I could be wrong again. Certainly wouldn't be the first time. And two, like everything, these things are cyclical, and there will be a time where it'll be a great time to jump back into the stock market. And most legitimate stocks are going to follow the market up, including ones that pay you simply for holding them. And if this podcast is still around in 3 years, we will be talking about those a lot, believe me. This is not the Perma-Bear podcast. There's a time and a place for everything. And we will need to be agile and adjust to the cycles. But getting all of that figured out now, I think, is very important. Now, as far as passives go, if we want to go even further up the risk curve, and this is nice because it is literally available to everybody who can participate in the market, albeit at a heightened risk, and that's going to be passives on your crypto. And the good news on that is we've pretty much been through version 1.0 of this, and we're moving in to version 2, and we learned a lot of things from version 1, in particular that some rates are, in fact, too good to be true. And a lot of very legitimate places were absolutely on some fuckery back then because they were simply trying to compete with everybody else and give out rates that were completely unrealistic and unsustainable. I remember when Terra Luna went down, I was getting emails from Binance and from Crypto.com saying, hey, those 7 to 12% rates you were getting on your crypto? Yeah, now they're going to be like 0.5% or 1% as we figure all this out. And this was both of them admitting that those rates were not sustainable and we're going to get them in really big trouble if they kept them there. And then you had people who just got completely wrecked over this whole thing. Richard Hart said it really well. He said, don't risk your entire stack for a 7% return. And when he said that at the time, he was referring to BlockFi before BlockFi was in any trouble at all. And we all know what happened there. So hopefully this time around, most of these places have figured it out and put better measures in place. Who knows? At some of these places, rates have gotten pretty high once again. So just be reasonable and don't do it with all the crypto you have, of course. But if you see some good opportunities at reputable places, by all means, get yourself a good 2 to 5% return on your crypto if it's just going to sit there anyway, Now, as always, not financial advice. Don't do anything I say, but there are 3 very distinct opportunities that almost everybody can participate in to earn passive income on their money, yet most people just simply don't do it. So please add getting your passives locked down to your checklist, and you can add the 3 different ways I mentioned to do it if you like, through your fiat, through dividends, and through crypto. Because believe me, this is really the definition of financial prepping. Because should we go through a really rough economic downturn, or you lose your job, or you take a really heavy financial hit somewhere else, you're going to be really glad you did this. So moving on from here, this is where it starts to get a bit more, I guess, difficult. And by difficult, just means putting effort forward. And if I'm going to pat myself on the back here, I will say at least this. I do check off every single box on this checklist that I'm giving you. Now, there's plenty of people who listen to this podcast who make a lot more money than I do. There's plenty of people who have the means and are in a location where they can do everything that I've done relatively easily. But the difference between those people and me is I actually execute. I don't let illogical fears get in my way. And if I do have any fears, I understand that most people, like we said before, most people fear the unknown. So I just make the unknown known and I learn about these things. And it turns out most of my fears were completely wrong, like the actual opposite of reality. But like I said, man, at the end of the day, it all comes down to execution, and executing is what I do. And as a result, I welcome a financial downturn with open arms. Bring it. I can't wait. Because for one, I have so many different options that are going to protect me from something like this no matter what happens. And like I said before, I'll be able to do what the rich people do and be able to swoop in and get a whole bunch of really great things I've always wanted on the cheap. And at that point, I'll be ready for the next cycle upward. But before that happens, we're going to have to trudge through some really muddy waters here. And and how bad could it get? Well, it is even worse than you probably think. We've already seen this decade things that we never thought were even possible, and the lengths that governments will go to at the expense of their own citizens. And as an American, I also know the lengths that my country has gone to in the past and the amount of people they have murdered simply to keep the dollar strong and the oil flowing. And any threat to that United States dollar, they're going to fight. And we've already seen it with crypto, and that fight is going to continue. So as a result of things like this, the next box on your checklist needs to be to get your banking situation in order and do whatever you have to do to make it so. Like I've said in the past here, I know deca millionaires that only have one bank, and I've even told them really exactly what I'm about to tell you. And when I did, not one of them sat there and pushed back on it. They were all like, oh yeah, that kind of does make sense. And one of them, I know for a fact, acted on it the next day. So at the very least, I would say, have a second bank somewhere. You don't even have to put a lot of money in it. Just have it open. Create a tunnel. Because we have some precedents here in the United States, of all places, which is supposed to have a very secure banking system. It's not as secure as people think it is, but when Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank went down, and the other one that I don't recall, people came to the realization, that light bulb came on. They're like, uh-oh, I better get out of my mid-sized bank or my small bank, or at the very least, open up an account with a large bank. And at the time, most people couldn't do it because there was so much demand, the systems couldn't handle it. And that's going to be kind of a running theme for the rest of this podcast. Do you want to sit there and compete with all the people who weren't prepared, as there's this mad rush for the exits, and the majority of people are going to get left behind? Or would you rather just put forth a little bit of effort now and then have all these measures in place? Now, I know some people, especially younger people, think, well, I have money in a bank and then I have money in crypto, so I'm covered. No, you're not. As much as we may not like it, banking is a necessary evil. In the developed world, we all need one, and you need to make sure you have options here as well. And if you really want to do this right, you're going to need a bank in a different country than the one you reside in. And there are places where you can do this remotely and as a non-resident. You just need to know where to go. I will help you with this later, by the way. And even though I just shit on the American banking system a little bit ago, I think it's a really good out to have regardless. I think we do have banks that are too big to fail here. The credit card options in this country are elite. I mean, you want to talk about passives. The amount of points some of these cards will give you is just bananas. And if you believe that insurance will actually be there to save you, should something happen. And right now, we're in an environment where that is supposed to be the case. Before, we had the possibility of bank bail-ins, where you bail out the bank. But we're back to bailouts again after those 3 banks crashed. So FDI insurance is supposed to come to the rescue. Now, if you believe that's going to happen, then the United States is where you want to be because we have higher coverage by far than any other country. We have $250,000 worth of coverage. Now, if you have 2 American banks, that's going to go up to $500,000. So in my opinion, there are a lot of reasons to have an American bank if you don't currently have one. Now, if you think you're from a foreign country and you can't get this done, there is something called an ITIN number that you can get. You can start a business very cheaply in a state like Delaware or Wyoming. And by doing this, you too can have access to the American banking system. But ultimately, what you're going to want to do, and I admit I myself have gone a bit overboard here, but it all made sense at the time, right? I don't need 6 banks, but I would say you would need, at best, if you really want to min-max this whole thing, would be to have 3. All right, so 1 is going to be your main bank that you do everything through. And then have something else, preferably in another country, to where I would call a retainer bank. To where maybe it doesn't have the functionality of your main bank, but it doesn't need to have that. It just needs to exist as a tunnel, like I said before, as a place where you can simply push your money over to should something happen with the bank you currently have, with your main bank. And then possibly a third bank, what I would call, I guess, a functionality bank. Maybe just in case your retainer bank doesn't play nicely with your main bank and use it as kind of a go-between, or a bank that performs a very specific task. Maybe it gives you exposure to other currencies where your other banks don't. Or people who own crypto, let me ask you something. How many places do you have which will convert your crypto into fiat? The answer for most of you is either 1 or 0. You're going to need at least 2. Because while, yes, I've seen more banks become more open to this, we're not in a crisis yet. All rules are off in a financial crisis. And we know that these places have no problems screwing you, especially if their government mandates it. For example, I blogged about this when the Canadian trucker protest was going on. Those banks in Canada did not want to comply with the government mandate. It's terrible for business. But at the end of the day, they didn't have a choice. You might think that the probability of something happening with your main bank is very low, and I would agree with you, it probably is. But again, we could be entering a time financially that we have never seen before, and we have already gotten little clues along the way to what the world might look like should something like this happen. So why risk it? Why do all of the other stuff I said before, yet still leave yourself exposed with your own bank? It makes no sense. Plus, there could be a lot of other things you could do with that foreign bank. I've noticed this myself. Some of these foreign banks in other countries have given me optionality that I just simply didn't have back home. And again, if there's any theme to these past 2 episodes, it simply comes down to options. Options are awesome. Lack of options completely sucks. To where having options is going to be the thing that bails you out in the end. And that's why we're doing this. And speaking of something that you can do that opens up entire universes of options and possibilities, it's going to be the last, and I'm doing air quotes, most difficult thing on your checklist, and that is getting foreign residencies and passports. Now, don't let the passports part scare you off of this. That does take a long time. It can take a lot of money depending on where you're getting it. This can certainly be on your list, but this isn't something you need to address right away. But the residency thing, I think you need to. I caught an interview on a podcast a couple weeks ago. If anybody knows what I'm talking about and knows what episode this was or whose podcast it was, go to YouTube. We also broadcast this podcast on YouTube, and put it down in the comments section so I don't sit here and sound like I'm talking out of my ass. But they were talking to, it wasn't the founder of Telegram, it was the CEO, it was an Asian guy. I know the founder of Telegram's a Russian guy. Or Toncoin, is something that had to do with the Telegram ecosystem. But this kid had more money than God. And they were saying, hey, why don't you do what SBF and CZ did, give your brand some exposure, and get a nice boat or a private plane or something like that. Because this kid had none of that. He had a ton of money, but he didn't have any of those nice things that really wouldn't have set him back hardly anything. They asked him why he didn't have those things. And he said, I just simply don't want it, because I would rather have freedom and agility. And this kid might have been Chinese, or at least, aware of what's going on in China. So this meant a lot to him because he knew what it was like not to have it. And so what does he have? He has crypto. He has gold. He has foreign passports. He has multiple banks. And I'm like, yes, this kid gets it. It's so much better to have things like this than it is to have, rich people flexes. He understood that having options is really where the game is won. And you don't truly have peak optionality if you are stuck bending to the whims of one country. For starters, you're missing out on a lot of opportunity. But having some sort of location independence is really where this game is won. And lucky for you, for all of us, there are still places you can go to get a residence card, which is really just as good as a passport, but it doesn't serve as a travel document and you can't vote. But apart from that, I had no idea how awesome these things are. And we spoke about this in 2 episodes. One of them was, I forget the episode number, but it was called Live Somewhere Else. And then there was another one called A Very Cheap Residency Permit or something like that. You guys know what I'm talking about, though. So we'll start with that one. But actually, before I do that, let me set this up. There are currently, in my mind, 3 residence permits that are the easiest to get and the cheapest to get. And I'm about to have all 3 of them in addition to the one I already have for Panama. Now, let me tell you this story. This is why we execute. Now, Panama had something called the Friendly Nations Visa. I still think they have this, but it's not what it used to be. And this was for 55 countries, if I recall, that could go in and for a set fee get permanent, which means forever, residence in Panama. Now, Panama, despite being a pretty awesome country, I did live there for a time, has a corporate tax of 0, mixed with a very strong banking sector. And so I was very interested because I saw the possibilities on the wall. I was like, well, I can start a business there and then unplug some of my income streams from my American business and plug it into my Panama business. On top of that, open up trading and investing accounts through my Panama business. and lower my tax bill significantly from this point forward. That could be worth a lot. How much does it cost? And I found out it was $15,000 to do, and I was like, ugh. I don't know about you, but I didn't have $15,000 just burning a hole in my pocket. But I did some back of the napkin math, and it just made sense. So I bit the bullet, and I executed, and I did it anyway. So flash forward to right now, what do I have? I have a residence card that I will have for the rest of my life. All I have to do is check in and clear customs for 1 day every 2 years, which is extremely easy to do. Panama is a hub for most places in the Western Hemisphere, so you can just have a nice layover at the very minimum, and then you're good. But in the very first year, I was able to get everything in place and move things over to the Panama side. And I'm only maybe 30% of the way there right now. I already saved over $15,000 in taxes. And I'm not a millionaire. So not only have I already made my money back in year one, what is that going to look like 10 years down the road? It's going to be amazing. And, oh, by the way, again, it is no longer $15,000. The minimum starts at about $200,000. And that's a main point I want to get across to you with these things. These things can be awesome, but they never stay awesome because people find out about them. And none of these countries want to get overwhelmed. So what they'll do is they will make everything either more expensive or more restrictive as far as who they let in and what you have to have and who you have to be. And this is already happening in 2 of the 3 residence cards I'm about to tell you about right now. But they're still, as we speak, very cheap and easy to get. And at the base minimum, at least you have a back pocket residency, a place you can go if things get bad where you are. But the added bonuses it gives you from a business perspective and a banking perspective and a potential real estate perspective down the road, you can't put a price on things like that. And the reason why most of you haven't done this is probably because you have these preconceived notions floating around in your head of what this process is like. And if you're anything like me, you're probably wrong about most of it. Again, it's the fear of the unknown, so let's make the unknown a bit more known and see where you can take it from here. Now, the cheapest, quickest, easiest one that gives you the least amount of options, for now at least, is going to be Palau. We did a whole dedicated episode on this. If you simply go to rns.id, you can go and learn about it, and for $250 on the blockchain, boom, you're good to go. You are now a resident of Palau for a year. You can renew afterwards if you want. And they will send your residence card directly to you by mail. Palau is trying very hard to become a digital hub for the world, just like El Salvador is trying to do. The difference is residence in El Salvador starts at $1 million right now, to where residence in Palau starts at $250,000. And what many people have done with their Palau residency is they have taken advantage of the fact that your Palau residency card is a fully certified KYC document. So if you want access to platforms and whatever that is not available in your country, but may be available as a Palau resident, this is a completely legal way to get there. And that's a pretty sweet option to have, no? Now, personally, I have renewed mine. I've never actually used it for anything, but I like the fact that the options on it are growing and growing. I want to support what they do. And I just simply like to have that option. That's, now I have some Eastern Hemisphere exposure. I have maybe exposure to the Australasian market. And what the hell do I need any of those things for? Well, nothing right now, but who knows? Options are good. And this is a very cheap and easy option that almost anybody can participate in. The next country of the 3 that is still very cheap right now, the requirements have gone up some, but it is still feasible for most people, and that's going to be Mexico. To this day, I still can't believe that you can get temporary residence in Mexico for, I think if you do it right, 3 or 4 years. I didn't do it right, but 3 or 4 years for under $1,000, and you don't even have to spend time here. You have to be present to get it, of course. But after that, you can pretty much fuck off and leave. But I don't know why you'd want to. Mexico is freaking awesome. There is literally no place right now I would rather live. I currently live here right now. And I'm probably going to base out of here for some time. Even though I don't have to. After 4 years, I can apply for a passport, and then you do have to be here for X amount of time, but I'm totally fine with that. Now, if you asked me 10 years ago, I'd have been like, well, I don't want to go down to Mexico. I don't want to be hot all the time. It's going to be dangerous. I'm going to be a kidnapping target. Their infrastructure is probably really poor, and there's some American products that I really like that I'm not going to be able to get down there. No, completely wrong on all of those things. The absolute opposite ended up being true. Now, depending on where you go in Mexico, you could be hot all the time if that's what you like. But there are plenty of places here that aren't that way. Mexico City, for example, is jacket weather most of the year because it's at elevation. A lot of people didn't know that. But this country has everything. The people are awesome. The food is top tier. People are polite and kind to each other. And there's just so much to it that it will never, ever get old. So you certainly don't have to live down here. You can simply leverage the residence permit for what it is. And again, have access to the business system, banking system, real estate, all that. But I just can't believe that you could do this for around $1,000, if not less, for a country like Mexico. It's bananas. But again, it's not going to be this way forever. It's already gotten more difficult. You used to have to make only $2,000 USD a year, and you had to prove that to them. Edit month, not year. And this requirement has gone up to 4. And it's only going to go higher, and these things are only going to get more expensive. So people who execute, take note. Getting that Panama residence permit at the time was painful for me financially, but god damn, am I glad I did it, and I'm super glad I did Mexico too. Options, contrarians, and damn good ones. Now this last one's going to be a little bit more hardcore simply because of where it is, but a cheap option that's going to probably run you around $3,000 to $4,000 is going to be Paraguay. Now Paraguay as a country is very cool. They're very based. They have like almost 100% hydroelectric power, so energy is very cheap out there. It might not be the most exciting country in the world, but you are right next door to places like Brazil and Argentina. And you do have to show up at least one day a year, if I recall correctly, which I personally am okay with. I would like to spend more time in that part of the world, but it might not be for everybody. But what you do get with that is the same thing you would have gotten with Panama, but for a much cheaper price. You have a zero tax country. A lot of traders are moving down there because you have access to things like Interactive Brokers and certain other American brokerage platforms that other countries may not let you have. Paraguay's cool with it. I mean, again, imagine making zero tax on your trading and your investing from this point on. How much money would that be right back into your pocket? And what could that money do for you during a financial downturn? I'm telling you guys, it just makes too much sense. But most people, I know most of you, for some reason, don't want to do this. And I'll bet you, like I said before, the reason is you just simply don't know enough. So, whatever questions you might want to have, whether it comes down to residency or places to live, or if you need a good lawyer, or you want information on opening foreign bank accounts remotely, or if you want to learn a language in one of these countries fast, or if you want to learn more about getting that ITIN number, everything. I got a guy. This is what he does. He finds the best people and places he can and puts his own name behind it and gives you this absolute buffet of choices and places to go if you want to learn more and if you need help. And you're going to want help. Going at this by yourself is not recommended. For Palau, you're not going to need any help. But for Mexico or Paraguay, or if it's going to be a different country that you're interested in, it costs a little more money or might require you to stay there longer. This guy probably has a guy or a girl for that. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the My Latin Life podcast, but Vance, the guy who runs the podcast and the website, is the man I'm talking about. I'm going to leave a link down below in the show notes that will take you to the page which has everything on it. And I know for a fact that what this page shows you is not everything. So what you can also do is find @MyLatinLife on Twitter, and he is okay with you DMing him and asking him questions. Now, please don't inundate him with stupid questions. You guys are above that. But if there's something you need to know or you're curious about that might not be covered, he should have the answer. This is all he does. The link down below is not an affiliate link, but if you want to say that VP sent you, we know each other, and that may signal to him that you're not somebody who's there to waste his time. But I've recommended this guy to a lot of people already, and I've used his recommendations several times, and it was an absolute lifesaver. So I'll add that page down below in the show notes. Make sure you add him on Twitter as well. It is called My Latin Life, but he does work in Europe as well. And I'm pretty sure Asia, he covers the gamut. But you now have a complete and comprehensive financial preppers checklist in front of you. Now, you can go full VP and check off every box. I can't argue against that. But I would recommend to give yourself as many options as possible. Most of these options take little to no effort, and the ones that take some effort, it's still not a crazy amount at the end of the day. And I've given you a sick resource, so we can break down some of those barriers of you just simply not knowing. Now, what you do with this is completely up to you, but the amount you're putting in compared to the amount you're getting back, I think is quite asymmetrical here. And whether we hit a horrible financial downturn or if we don't, the peace of mind alone, to me, just like it was for that Asian kid, the CEO of Telegram or Toncoin, I can't recall, is just something you can't put a price on. You can either worry about financial collapse or you can embrace it. But it's not just a mindset, it's execution too. So go out and execute and be crazy, but also be early.